much for joining me on the life stage for our virtual event. First, can you introduce who you are and what it is that you do, please?
Absolutely. So my name is Aomawa Shields, and I am an associate professor of physics and astronomy at the University of Irvine in California. And I am an astronomer, an astrobiologist, and author of the new book, Life on Other Planets, a memoir of finding my place in the universe.
Where did the idea to write the book first come from?
For the longest time, I had these two loves, astronomy and acting. And whenever I would tell people that I loved these two things, I often got a look of surprise. And so I spent a long time choosing one or the other, and one by itself never felt fully right. And so once I got to the level where I realized that it wasn't about choosing, that I could embrace all of these parts of myself and become open to ways to put them together, that I didn't have to try to find and figure out so much. It became important for me to share that story with others, because I realized that I'm not as unique as I once believed. That there are a lot of people out there who have a diversity of interests, whether it's science and art like me, or other things, and maybe it's more than two things.
And very early on in the book, you mentioned as a child that you were always looking up at the stars. Do you remember where that first sort of fascination come from, or what triggered you to always be gazing skywards?
My family would go to these Blue Angels aerial flight shows. So we lived in San Diego, California, which is sort of the home of, if you've ever watched the movie Top Gun. And even before Top Gun came out, there was an aerial flight team called the Blue Angels, and they would, go up into the sky and do these incredible, sort of death-defying acts. That was like the first encouragement of my neck to crane skyward. And then, of course, I kept doing it even once the sun went down. And then I got to see all these other things in the sky that I had no idea, really, I hadn't thought about being out there. And that led to the question of, what is out there? And is anything looking back at me?
Very early on, you choose at 12, I think you say, that you want to go to MIT. Do you know what inspired that decision, even as a 12-year-old, that you wanted to go to one of the best universities in the world?
I must have heard at some point that MIT was like the place to be, and the hardest, toughest science school in the United States. And I, an overachiever from a young age, and it was like, I'm going to go there. So that I think that planner part of me that likes to, know what I'm going to do next, really manifested early on when I saw this life being this lifestyle being depicted, and I wanted that. And I thought, these are the steps I need to go through to get to it. And while I was there, I stumbled into acting. I was dragged into an audition by some of my girlfriends and ended up getting cast. And there I was at Phillips Exeter Academy doing astronomy and acting.
You sort of mentioned right at the start of the book just how vast the universe really is. How do we go about even looking for someone that might be looking back at us?
But for those of us who are interested in answering that question, are we alone? There are many ways to go about doing it. And the way that I do it, the way my team does it, is once a planet is found orbiting another star, so we call that kind of planet an extrasolar planet or an exoplanet, then our work begins, which is, okay, we found this planet. Is it orbiting its star in a particular range of distances where it could be warm enough for water to flow on the surface? And we use that as our primary kind of criterion, because all life on Earth needs water. Everything from the smallest, tiniest microbe to the largest elephant needs water. And that may not be the only way that life can survive. And we have to, of course, look for other ways beyond water. But our sort of zeroth order step is, where else in the universe could water flow? And our work is using computer models. We take what we know about a planet that's been discovered at that kind of sweet spot around its star. We call that area of distances the habitable zone. But we don't yet know if it's habitable. Just because it's orbiting at a certain point in space doesn't mean that it has anything like our kind of climate. So that's why the computer modeling work that my team does is so critical. We take models that have been used to predict climate on Earth, and we change the host star, we change the atmosphere, we change the shape of the orbit, and we identify just how habitable this planet could be as a function of aspects of the planet that we can't yet constrain with observations. For the Earth, the small Earth-sized planets that we found, we don't yet know what their atmospheres are like. And so our work, we can tell you what kind of atmosphere they would require in order to have a climate that's warm enough for liquid water, but not too warm to have it boil away. But we can tell you what, if your surface is granite, this is how the climate would be from that star's light shining on it, shining on the atmosphere. We can tell you if the surface is ice, if it's a mixture of different types of sand and mountains and vegetation. My job really is to produce that prioritized target list for the next generation of telescopes to follow up on. And so that's that the computer modeling we do is, let's turn knobs and see if we can identify a planet that is habitable no matter what we throw at it, no matter what its atmosphere, no matter what the shape of its orbit, no matter what's on the surface, no matter what's kind of, tilt it's got. Once we identify that planet and we can tell our telescopes, point to that planet, this question of what do we look for that would tell us that there's really life there. It can't just be a liquid water, because that liquid that we see, and there's a way that we can detect the presence of a liquid on a planet's surface. We can look for how that liquid interacts with starlight and look for that. We call it glint. But that liquid might not be water. We have an example within our own solar system. Saturn's moon Titan has liquid on its surface, but that liquid is ethane and methane. So if we find life there, it would be like we do not know it. Life as we do not know it here. So we have to look for other things, and people are looking for what we call biosignatures, which are these biologically generated global impacts to a planet's atmosphere or surface that we could observe from space. And figuring out what that particular recipe is of atmospheric gases and maybe surface impacts that would tell us unequivocally that life is doing that life is excreting something into the atmosphere that we can measure. That's a huge area of active research, trying to figure out if it's a combination of oxygen and methane and ozone and other gases and what those gases really are, and coming up with false positives, because we have to look at the other side of it. What might make us think life is there erroneously. We don't want to be so focused on Earth, so Earth-centric, that we miss discovering life elsewhere in the universe because we're only looking for the type of life that we'd find here on Earth. So people are thinking about, for example, in the DNA backbone, might there be something else besides those kind of major DNA constituents that life could use? Instead of carbon, could it use, like we're all carbon-based life forms. Instead, could life use silicon? And if that life did use silicon, that life might look like, a rock instead of an actual, humanoid form. And people have talked about phosphorus. There's been debatable discoveries of phosphorus elsewhere within our own Earth environment, life that might use phosphorus instead of other or arsenic or other kind of substitutes for what we normally see.
If we were to find something on one of these planets, be it something we would recognize or something made of silicon or anything else, do you think that form would have any rights? Would we, if it was possible, be able to go and take samples and analyze it, or would it be a whole other kettle of fish as to what we could do if we were to find something?
As scientists, there are ethical considerations that we must uphold and observe. And I once took a seminar as a graduate student on the ethics of science, and I found it really very, very critical, because we are, above all else, humanitarians, even before the science comes in, and it thinks and that we have to extend that to, like, once we leave the boundaries of our planet, right?
Absolutely.
Not humanitarians, but right, whatever that equivalent would be, that's more of a broader of a broader perspective for all life forms. And so I certainly would not want to assume because we find life that we have the right to alter it in any way. I would hope that as scientists, we would be able to observe first and work to make contact, and then proceed based on that information to be able to continually adjust and assess as those early baby steps of making contact with a new species are undertaken. And the bulk of the life on this planet is microbial. And we see that humans, like, we come on the scene basically on New Year's Eve, like almost midnight. It's like the bulk of our time of the Earth's history, we have not been on this planet. And so I get this question too, like, if we find life on another planet and it's not life that can wave and say hello and start a conversation with us, would I find that any less of a discovery or disappointing? And my answer is absolutely not. It would be like, just to be able to know that we live in a universe with multiple origins of life would be astounding. And in my mind, it doesn't really matter what the life is. Just to know that life has evolved elsewhere would change everything.
Do you think we will find something in our lifetime, or in yours and my lifetimes?
The James Webb Space Telescope, for example, has provided us with images that I think no one had anticipated. We discovered or confirmed the discovery of an Earth-sized planet with James Webb in January. And we're taking more data this summer to see if we can figure out what's in its atmosphere. So this is leading me to be incredibly hopeful that we might be able to identify those biosignatures on even Earth-sized worlds within our lifetime. And if not our lifetime, then our children's lifetime. And we have the Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite, TESS, which is in space, like Kepler. And NASA's Kepler mission operated for almost a decade and was like almost solely responsible for the exponential increase in exoplanet discoveries. Kepler found close to 3,000 exoplanets within its lifetime, taking us, to now we have over 5,400 exoplanets that we know of so far. And that was just from looking at one tiny patch of the sky towards the constellation Cygnus and staring and looking for dips in the light from the star that's caused by a planet passing in front of that star. Now imagine TESS, which is an all-sky survey, doing the same thing. So finding 3,000 planets from looking at one tiny patch of the sky, imagine how many planets we're going to find from TESS over the next decade.
There's always new things happening. Is there anything you're especially looking forward to or seeing the results from that's out there at the moment?
I am. So the Europa Jupiter System mission is going to send a drill essentially to Jupiter's moon Europa, which we know has a liquid water. It has an ocean underneath an icy shell. So this is this ice moon, and the whole Jupiter system is really intriguing because there's a resonance within that system. We've got a moon called Io that's covered in volcanoes alongside a moon that's completely ice covered. And this moon, Europa, we know, of course, on our planet where there's water, there's life. So we know there's an ocean, but we don't know, first of all, how deep that ocean is, how thick the ice crust is on top of that ocean, and nor do we know what might be swimming around in that ocean. And so I'm excited for that drill to drill down through that ice and see what might be in there. Because if we find life within our own solar system, I mean, we wouldn't have to, life beyond Earth, within our own solar system, we would not have to contend with those vast astronomical distances that, that we're at the effect of really for exoplanet life searches. If we find that life within our own backyard, I mean, being able to return and study would be so much easier. And that's knowing that we have these prospects within our own solar system is incredibly exciting to me.
When you're explaining in the book, initially you started a PhD program and it didn't work out for you, you were discouraged, your professor wasn't very kind to you, didn't support you, was it then a difficult decision to return to astronomy later?
I had started that PhD program, that first one, right out of undergrad, right out of MIT. And I did it largely unconsciously. It was sort of a decision I made based on, this is what you do. If you're going to be a scientist, you need to get a PhD. And yet I had still felt that conflict my senior year at MIT. I had applied to acting schools. I'd applied to astronomy schools. I hadn't gotten into acting, but I had gotten into an astrophysics PhD program. But then after that first year, during that first year, there was a lot of distraction. I started taking acting classes again as a PhD student in astronomy. And of course, when you're not fully committed to something, when your mind's not focused, it's very difficult to excel. And some of the courses I started to struggle with academically, and I had this professor tell me to consider other career options. And I internalized that comment. I thought, he's a professor. He knows more than I do. He probably sees through me. I'm going to take this opportunity and apply to acting schools again. And I auditioned, and this time I got in and went to UCLA. And it was playtime essentially at first, and then I realized how hard it is to learn acting. It's got its own. It's just hard in a different way. But yeah, I decided to. Gosh, it was like, I had finished acting school. I was taking these odd jobs to survive while I auditioned. And someone had asked me, if I missed astronomy, because I could probably get a better paying day job doing that than the jobs I was doing. And I realized I did. And so I took a job and it was like this magical moment if I reached out to an old MIT advisor, and she said, there's Caltech, which was nearby. I was in LA, so just in Pasadena. Caltech often posts jobs in astronomy. Check out their little bulletin board. And I went there online, and they had literally posted a job that day that I was perfect for. And it allowed me to, all it needed was a bachelor's degree and some good oral communication skills. I was like, I've got those. And I ended up operating the help desk for Spitzer, the Spitzer Space Telescope, which was very much like Hubble, except it looked at the universe in the infrared instead of the visible. So it was really good at looking at the dust from star formation. And I was answering help desk tickets and then forwarding the more challenging problems up to the PhDs. And through working at that job, I started to hear talks about this new burgeoning field called exoplanets that had really exploded since I'd been gone. And I also, people knew that I was an actor. And there was a science TV show that was casting. And I got told that was happening, and got my stuff in, and they were like, we need to get you into producers today. And like, I got that hosting gig, and then the show got greenlit for more episodes, and they changed the host. And I was devastated because I thought, this was my big break. This was the thing of like science and acting coming together. But I hadn't made the cut to the next round, and I knew I wouldn't without the PhD. And in the middle of all of this, I got put in touch with Neil deGrasse Tyson. He had seen the show I had hosted, Wired Science, and he gave me his opinion, which was, without the PhD, you're simply another person who wants to be on television. But he said, the Venn diagram, of course, he used very technical sciencey language. He said the Venn diagram of people who, want to be on TV, have that good TV personality and have a PhD is far more narrower. And so it was like, I was hearing, go back and get the PhD from Neil deGrasse Tyson. I was hearing it from basically indirectly from NASA if I wanted to work to be an astronaut. And the job I had as help desk operator was self-limiting without the PhD. I mean, there was only so far I could go. And I had been promoted to scheduling observations on the spacecraft, which was very exciting. It was like putting jigsaw puzzle pieces together, telling the telescope where to point in such a way that it was efficient, that it wasn't slewing all over the place. And that was my job as a scheduler, is to be as efficient as possible with the observations of other PhD astronomers, but I would never have any of my own without that PhD.
How do you maintain a sense of connection between what you do as your scientific self and also your artistic and creative expression?
Writing this book was such a, I don't often use the word perfect, but it was the perfect outlet for that and combination of that. I got to share my story using my creative side, with the writing. I'd started to learn to write. I mean, I've been writing since I was a child, writing poems, but I learned how to write nonfiction from my teacher, Natalie Goldberg. And I started taking workshops and going to retreats with her from, I think it was 2002. So it's been over 20 years now. And but the act of like writing my story and learning how to write it in a way that's where it wasn't just me sharing the science, like that was very important to me, that the personal in this book, the personal is what drives the story. That I didn't want to write a popular science book. I wanted to write a story of my background, and the science is a huge part of that. But if I've done it right, the reader is not going to know that they're learning science. They almost won't. It's like they're like, oh, I didn't even. It'll be almost in passing, where you'll know by the end of the book why the sky is blue, and how long we've known that for, and what's so difficult about learning what we learn about planets orbiting other stars, and why our climate is the way it is, and where our climate's going. There's a little bit of climate science in there too, but it's all around the story of a person whose life has been messy at times, and who's been unsure for a long time, and has at last found a way to embrace and accept myself and my full potential, which hopefully will inspire others to do the same. I also, in my job as a professor, I get to use my creative arts background to teach students astronomy and to share the wonder and the awe of the universe with them. And I don't think I'd be able to do that the way I do it without the acting background. And our program, Rising Star Girls, which is it's a program dedicated to encouraging middle school girls of all colors and backgrounds to explore and discover the universe using the creative arts, using theater, writing, and visual art. So this is all about encouraging us to look at the sciences and basically all professions in a different way, that it's not about the personal is here, the professional is over here, and they're not integrated. In fact, the personal informs the professional. They are integrated.
What sort of advice are you giving to these girls in the program, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds that want to pursue a career in the sciences?
Well, above and foremost, we want them to know that the conversation they had with their families that morning at breakfast can and should inform how they feel about what they learned that day. That they don't have to hide who they are or keep who they are separate from what they're learning. That things will get hard as they continue to learn about astronomy and physics, and we hope that that they'll continue on their paths. But if they have that personal connection to it, from writing a poem about that star or that constellation, drawing a picture of that planet, which they can't get wrong. And this is the thing, they can't get these creative arts projects that they do about astronomical phenomena wrong. No one can say that poem or that drawing that they wrote or drew was wrong. And that increases their confidence. And of course, eventually, there are going to be more tests. There's going to be more physics. It's going to get challenging, but the hope is that personal connection they can hold on to, and that will anchor them. And I think the other main message for these girls is there's a place for them in this field. We not only want them in astronomy, we need them. We need this diverse set of perspectives in astronomy. And so they hopefully will see others like me as role models. But and this is actually a message of both for the girls and for those reading the book is that if there is no role model doing what you want to do, you can be your own. You don't have to assume because no one's done that thing you want to do that it shouldn't be done. That in doing so and foraging ahead, even when there isn't someone else to look up to, and it's a hard journey to do that, but knowing that other people can kind of bolster you and give you encouragement, and then you make the path a little bit less
daunting, I suppose.
for others. Daunting, yeah, a little more worn down.
Yeah, absolutely. My final question was going to be what advice or what do you want people to take away from life on other planets, from the book and also from your journey specifically? If you could give one key message.
There's no one way to be a scientist. There's no one way to be an actor. There's no one way to do anything. The way to do it is to be you doing it. And if you've left a dream by the side of the way or by the wayside and you are afraid that it's too late, it's not. It's not too late. And you can start small. Start today with a small thing. It's not about making huge radical steps and changes overnight. It's spend 5 minutes opening that book that you've been wanting to read, or pulling out that instrument that's been in the corner that has been collecting dust that you've always wanted to play or play more, and just play for fun, not to sound any good. Just have fun with it and incorporate something that you've been missing into your life in a small way, and then see how the universe responds. Because in my experience, the universe will pick up on that willingness to embrace yourself, your whole self, and will show and reveal many more ways to do so, that many of which you may never have imagined.
Absolutely incredible. That is such an inspiring end message and such an inspiring journey that you have as well for many people wanting to go into this field and study the sciences, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds. Thank you so much for joining me on the life stage at our virtual event today.
Thank you. It's been an honor.